Hello guys, it's Orest from Ukraine, and today I would like to touch a very sensitive topic, which for many people could be a mystery, but if you think wide, this kind of can be extension of the great game which started in the 19th century in the global politics, and now we are witnessing this around the Russian invasion in Ukraine, specifically in relation to this, how many countries around the world are involving into this massive conflict, and in particular, the United Kingdom. So, for this video, to have a discussion like, is it really the extension of the great game? I invited Johnny Pierce. Johnny, please welcome to join us. And just for the short intro, Johnny is a professional teacher. You also like talk a lot on your YouTube channel about the geopolitics, about sociology, and in the YouTube channel, the Tippling Philosopher. I'm going to provide link down below. You can guys learn more about Jonathan's work in regard to Ukraine and in regard to the global politics in general. So, Johnny, nice to see you.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm a former teacher. Unfortunately, I've got multiple sclerosis, so I don't teach anymore. I'm a philosopher. So my main channel, Atypical Philosopher, is about the philosophy. And then I moved my geopolitics stuff over to ATP Geopolitics because I've become hugely obsessed with the Ukraine war. And I guess for me, an interesting question when I think about what's going on is like, why am I so interested in this? Well, what does it mean to me? What's it saying to me? What underwrites my obsession with the Ukraine war? But certainly, anyway, I've been sort of really interested in the conflict for a good 6 months of posting about it online, and thinking about what place, as you asked, what place does the UK, what role do we play in this, and why? So yeah, but thank you for having me on.
Yeah, actually, UK plays like an imposing role in this war, and all the help, all the support you are providing is simply tremendous. Yes, but I would like to start and narrowing down our conversation, and you are the great like person to talk about this because you are local from the United Kingdom. So I would like to touch the point of the great game. For those who don't know the geopolitics a lot, guys, I'm just going to make a short brief. So the great game is the term which defines the complicated geopolitical processes during the Victorian era in the United Kingdom, when United Kingdom was moving different political tools in order to play this great game against the Russian Empire in the late 19th century, when both the British Empire and the Russian Empire were almost touching each other because the Britain gained huge control over the Indian subcontinent, while the Russian Empire was extending east and was moving south to the Central Asian states, like the modern Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and so on. And they were about to meet each other in a modern day Afghanistan. So the great game is like the complex mechanism of different tools, how to prevent the clash of those two empires, and how each of those two empires was trying to play their cards in order to prevent the opposite one for expansion. That's like very, very short. If you can add something as the British guy, you can please do so.
Well, I think it's a good time to say there's a difference between the British approach to empire and maybe the Russian approach to empire. And I'm no Russian historian; you'll know far more about this than I will. But the British approach to an empire is, having countries in an empire whereby we would go to different countries, stick a flag down, and kind of exploit them and say you are now in the British Empire. But we'd be controlling them from afar. Right, so we had set up maybe some rich people to exploit natural resources and control the people there. Whereas I think the Russian sense of empire was to kind of expand. So they weren't going to sailing around the world putting flags down, but they're expanding from geographically where they were to the nations around them. And in many cases, in Ukraine, I think this could be the case. It's assimilating Ukraine into Russia with intergenerational kind of mixing of populations, taking population from Russia, putting them in other country in these other countries, and then that kind of mixing going on. So eventually it was very difficult to differentiate, say, in Ukraine's case, Ukraine from Russia in many ways. And although
Okay.
Ukraine's refound its identity, like,
I agree. I agree on this different approach, and this definitely makes sense because the British Empire was a classic maritime empire, and the
mm,
Russian Empire is the land empire, right? So
mm,
that's why you have this approach. Also, if you remember, even within the British Empire, there was great migration of peoples. For example, many Indians were sent to East African colonies to serve there, and so on. So basically that makes sense. And even now, if I travel to many, let's say, Commonwealth countries, I still see like a huge legacy of British Empire in those countries, even like almost more than 100 years past. But let's go behind it, yes. And
mhm.
uh, Afghanistan or like other Central Asian countries became the epicenter, which were like sandwiched between the spheres of influence of Russian Empire and the British Empire. And now Ukraine in the 21st century becomes this center of attention for the entire uh, modern world, right? So basically, we see how United States, how Britain, how the entire European Union are deeply involved into the area, into my own native land, into Ukraine, which in the previous decades, felt very distant. So this I would like to get your opinion. Why are you like so deeply involved? Like for example, Boris Johnson was one of the first politicians who personally visited Kiev when it was still alleged to be like physically dangerous. Basically, I was at the same time when Boris Johnson visited Kiev. It was in early April when the surrounding area of Kiev became liberated. So for many other people, it was unthinkable. Then also, Britain is the second military provider of aid to Ukraine, which is huge. Also, I must say that considering the recent years' history, Britain is distancing itself from the politics of continental Europe, the Brexit and all that stuff. And now, they jump across the entire European continent and play one of the key roles. Why do you think it's so?
I think, well, first, I just want to pick up on Britain being the second biggest donator or aid giver to Ukraine in military aid. I don't know the latest figures coming out of Ramstein and from last week, where loads of people are suddenly like, we're going to give you everything. And that was really fantastic. But actually, if you add up EU funding into that. So, for example, if you look at just the basic unilateral what people are giving, Germany has say given this much, and UK looks to give more. But then Germany or France, for example, gives 25% of the funding to the EU. So when the EU give a load of stuff to Ukraine, if you add that on to what France has given and Germany have given, actually they've given more. So it depends how you add up these numbers. One must be careful to say UK have given the second most, and actually we can also talk about as a percentage of GDP, because Estonia have given the most as a percentage of what they have, what they are able to give.
True.
Anyway, so those are interesting things to think about. But yeah, what you say is fascinating. So Boris Johnson, there's going to be two things going on here. It's like morality. So what do I do because it's morally right to do? And then political kind of utility or political capital. So for Boris Johnson, he was really unpopular in the UK at the time. There's lots of scandals about him lying, lots of other scandals, and he was actually deeply unpopular even in his own party. His party was split about him. So he was just about to kind of lose his prime ministership. Ukraine, you could, if you were really cynical, you could say Ukraine provided a great opportunity for him to be successful and to do something that was really good and get praised for it. So he did that. Did he do it because it was right to do it, or because it actually was really good PR for him? I don't know. Perhaps we'll never know. But there's this closeness. He's just visited again. He's not even a minister, let alone prime minister in the government. He's an MP. And he's just visited Ukraine again, and the Ukrainians love him. So he has that. There's going to be that personal thing where he's going to go and to Ukraine because he gets personal gratification. But whatever the reasons were, he still did the right thing as far as I'm concerned, which is supporting Ukraine, both in terms of the rhetoric and in terms of the military and humanitarian aid.
Mhm. Like it's interesting to hear this, and like it's even many Ukrainians are surprised and feel grateful how he became actively involved in the stuff over here. Like I think a couple of days ago he visited Ukraine again, not
Yeah,
being the prime minister anymore, and in his Instagram profile is written Boris Johnson UK, right? So if in Ukrainian approach, if you add to the surname in the end, like UK, like Uk, and we can assume Boris Johnsonuk, it sounds very, very Ukrainian. So like all the Ukrainians, which all
brilliant.
the surnames which finish with UK, Uk, it's like, the indication that this surname comes most probably from Ukraine. So Boris Johnsonuk, like absolutely can be Ukrainian, and even the name Boris is very widespread
Yeah.
name over.
That's brilliant. And I wonder whether he knew that or his PR team knew that, because
Yeah.
that's very clever. And at the end of the day, if people are telling you how wonderful you are going to want more of that. Like from a very personal psychological point of view, he's going to be loving visiting Ukraine. He's going to be loving doing anything to do with Ukraine because he gets a lot of credit for that. And so there'll be an element of playing on that. But certainly we did we did give a lot of assistance to Ukraine. And I also wonder whether Brexit has a lot to do with this. So you mentioned this. Now, we had just come out of Europe. Europe were dithering. Like I'll lay my cards out. I'm a Remainer. I'm really pro-Europe. I wanted to remain in Europe, so I'll say that. But Boris Johnson was, at the end of the day, he led the Leave campaign. Okay, even though at the beginning he was 50-50, but he decided one way and then really went with it.
Mhm.
So he brought us out of the EU essentially, but UK were then in a position where we were really struggling in terms of the economy, and we still are, but these got hidden by COVID and lots of other things. So we're in quite a precarious situation, and along came the Ukrainian war, and the EU seemed to be dithering a little bit. Boris Johnson went with it and then got a lot of kudos for doing that, a lot of respect. So this became, and again, is this because it was morally the right thing to do, or because it was a political posturing in the EU or in Europe as a whole? I don't know. But UK, I think, realized that they could get a lot of political capital from helping out Ukraine a lot. And I say that's the right thing to do. But also we were like, there you go, Europe, take that.
What I see that, like, what if we can, go even more cynical, and in addition to normal moral obligation to support
Mhm.
Ukraine, in addition to the political capital that politicians are getting and the country as the whole is getting, like, the fact that now United Kingdom invited over 100,000 Ukrainians who are mainly women and children, like, definitely your economy will benefit in the long term from this. And many people also think that the fact that this wave of refugees now went to European Union and in Britain, including, will benefit your guys' economies in the long term, because the human capital is the biggest capital you can ever had, and the ways how the policy was made is like super comfortable. Like there is this program Homes for Ukraine, which basically grants the right for Ukrainian, not even refugees, so they don't have the status refugee as other refugees from around the world. They easily can get a permission to come to United Kingdom, to stay there up to 3 years, automatically grant all the social, medical benefits, and automatically are granted with the right to work. So this is unprecedented support for people fleeing their own country, and this environment is like so comfortable that I believe most people will stay in the UK and they will not come back to Ukraine. Even though I would like them to come back as a Ukrainian, as a Ukrainian who is staying here, I understand that in a more like powerful economy where you have all the in like comfortable things created for people to stay. What do you think about this? Isn't it?
There's a lot of complexity around this. So Britain was actually criticised. There's a lot of criticism inside Britain that we weren't doing enough for the refugees. In fact, we were being a bit slow. With the European people like Poland, obviously, were doing an incredible amount, neighbouring countries to Ukraine. It was very difficult for Ukrainians to get to Britain to get those things because there's a lot of paperwork. We didn't have enough people working on in the border sort of areas and whatnot. We had to send people, I think, over to France, and there were not enough people. There's like one desk and two chairs, and it was just it was a bit rubbish at the time. And so I don't know if that's hugely improved, but there is a big criticism that the UK hasn't actually done. Although what we do offer is good, there's just not a lot of it. There's not enough places, so on and so forth. But there's a really interesting dynamic. My sister is, in fact, has a Ukrainian refugee, and she's a teacher. She's in charge of a department teaching English as an additional language. So she deals a lot with refugees from around the world. And she says, look, across the road from the college, there is this hotel full of refugees that are really struggling to get status in war-torn countries from places like Yemen, Afghanistan, and all these places, and yet the Ukrainians are coming in, getting X, Y, and Z really quickly. And there's a kind of there's an interesting conversation to be had about, is that right? And our support for Ukraine, why do we support Ukraine so much and not the war in Yemen? And we're actually providing weapons for Saudi Arabia. And then why is there an obsession with Ukraine? Is it because they are white European looking people? Is it because it's closer to home? Look, what are all these ideas going around that underwrite why Britain is far more supportive of, say, Ukraine than the Yemen?
What's your opinion on that? Like, why is it more supporting?
It's a great question, and I would say that without being a little bit harsh, everyone's a little bit racist, which is to say there's a lot of psychology involved here. So if people look like you, you're more likely to have sympathy for them. It's the way, you're talking about in-group, out-group psychology here. So the in-group for us is going to be predominantly, and I'm speaking as a white British person, so this will be different from another British person who is not white, right? So, but for most of the population, is going to be looking at Ukraine, thinking they're European, they're more like us type thing, and that will feed into your sense of empathy and why you would be so interested in supporting them. Russia, we've got this long history of Russia being the bad guys, going back to the Second World War. We've got Litvinenko, who was assassinated in the UK. We've got the Skripals, who were attempted to be assassinated in Salisbury, just down the road from where I am, where we're thinking this is fresh in our mind. Russia are the bad guys. They're the big baddies that are attacking Ukraine. Ukraine need underdogs. British people love the underdogs in sport. We love supporting the underdogs. This fits in with like why we would support Ukraine a load. Yemen is a different country that's in a hotter climate. That when we look at that on TV, people are dressed differently, people look different, the whole country is different. We don't have that sense of empathy for them, and different religion and all of this stuff going on, which I think there's a lot of psychology involved in why the British people support Ukraine and actually generally don't really know about Yemen, and it's unfair. Well, like, if you're looking at this morally, it's pretty unfair, but that's the way psychology works, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for this comment. Actually, for all the listeners now, I would like to recommend a movie which actually tells more about this psychological approach to empathy that you just made. I don't remember the name of the movie, but the main actor is Matthew McConaughey. The movie was made in 1995 and is telling a story about the young lawyer in one of the southern states in the America, is defending
Lincoln Lawyer.
Probably, I don't remember. Yeah, he's like defending the murder uh, the murder. Okay, there was like a criminal case involved with the murder, and the supposed murder was a white person, with the jury also being white. So there was a big likelihood that he's not going to to receive a sentence, but the way how the main actor, like Matthew, as a young lawyer, persuaded the jury to make the right decision, he was explaining the details, how the crime happened, like which parts of the body were cut and this and that. And the girl who died, who was killed, was a black girl. Yeah. So he made all these details and then just told out loud. And now imagine she's white. So this was like the crucial moment in the movie, and it probably explains a little bit about what you just said. Yeah. But those are emotional parts. Let's talk about maybe some calculation, and about some like politics over here, and even like the military involvement. So you told that Russia and United Kingdom are century long rivals, and we started actually with this topic with the great game and
Mm,
empires and expanding in all different directions. One of the biggest cornerstone in the relations between Britain and Russia was the Crimean War in the middle of 19th century, when Western powers seen that there is a risk of growing Russian influence in the Middle East. So basically, there was a conflict between Ottoman Empire and Russia. Russia was dominating power by then. If Russia would win from Ottoman Empire, there was a risk that they will have direct access to the Mediterranean, and so on. So the biggest clashes in that time happened on the Crimean Peninsula, which is also the central topic now in Ukraine. The Crimean Peninsula actually commands the control of the entire area in the Black Sea. And that's why Russians annexed it from Ukraine in 2014. Uh, if we are talking about the Crimean War, where Britain was deeply involved with tens of their soldiers died in this war, they came back home with actually nothing. It was a big humiliation of the Britain Empire that they didn't meet their goals. It was the first war when the photo cameras were involved. So basically, the society already seen the casualties. They get faster access to information and so on. And somebody from Britain told me that, like, Orest, now Britain is so involved into the Ukrainian question because we still remember Crimea. And can you comment on that
yes,
somehow?
I would disagree with that. So I would say that history is written by the victors, and if you ask anyone on the British streets what their opinion of the Crimean War was, they would be thinking about the war going on now. Virtually no one knows about the Crimean War because I don't think, I'm just remembering my own history. So I did history up to a certain level until I was 16 in the UK, and the Crimean War doesn't feature at all in the curriculum at all. We don't learn about it. So, which is really interesting. You learn about your successes, World War One, World War Two, or the British Empire, all this stuff. But where things didn't quite go so well, yeah, no, I don't think we'll learn about that. And that's really common, around the world. And I don't think the Crimean War has any impact upon the national psyche and the opinion of the public. Now, you've got to understand the opinion of the public in how we understand this war and how we support Ukraine will be different from the opinion of our politicians, and why we support them will be different. There'll be a lot of psychology involved for, like I've talked to you about the general public, but with the politicians, there's going to be geopolitics involved. There's going to be international trade. There's going to be the defense industrial military complex. There's going to be strategizing about the power structures around the world. There's going to be considering the EU. There's going to be thinking about China. There's going to be Russia as its influence, about natural resources, energy policy. Those are just not on the cards for the general UK people. And in fact, I don't think the Crimean War will feature in our conversations about Ukraine at all. It's quite incredible. Yet for you, you would probably know more about the Crimean War and the British involvement in the Crimean War than I do, and
That's
the
very
average.
interesting, because people live in different informational bubbles and they create different associations. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now, like when I am like involved in the war in Ukraine, being personally here, and I travel to the frontline areas. Also, I talk with different smart people like you from different countries. I try to make associations and I try to put the dots together,
Mm.
and somehow for me the great game, the Crimean War, with current involvement of Britain, was going along the main line. But as you see, as you tell, it
And
is
it's
not.
fascinating. It probably should do, right? But it doesn't. So the biggest, how we know the Crimean War is Florence Nightingale. So Florence Nightingale is this iconic figure in British history that everyone, if you ask anyone, it's on the primary school curriculum, which is this nurse who came back from the Crimean War and used what she learned about the Crimean War to influence nursing and improve nursing, and was like a national hero, right? That was like, how do we, maybe that's like, well, what can we take from the Crimean War that's really, really positive? Florence Nightingale, nursing, and and there you go. That's how we're going to learn about the
Improving of
Crimean
the
War.
entire medical system, and so on. And just to add, for those who are not familiar with the Crimean War in the Western world, and probably most of you are not, as I just figured it out, try to read a little bit. It's very
Mm.
interesting because many scientists treat the Crimean War as World War Zero. So basically, the aftermath of the Crimean War created the geopolitical situation in the area, which later escalated into the Balkan Wars, the World War One, and then you take it from there. So very interesting, and
These every
how
history is interconnected, and all of these, especially when you're talking about empire and geopolitics and India, even, and all these. Yeah, it will be all connected, and to understand, say, World War One is to understand the Balkans, is to understand the influence of the Great Game. So yeah.
Okay, so now we are about to make the conclusion. Can we tell that the war in Ukraine is the great game of the 21st century?
It depends how you define that, but what I think, this is huge. I mean, this is the biggest conflict since the Second World War, because you might talk about Vietnam and being a proxy war for the Cold War and war with Russia, but this is involving more people getting together. This is involving the EU and politics about the EU and power. You've got to understand that for Putin, it's like NATO is a threat, the EU is a threat. The EU are the only people really that can stand up to Putin and Russia directly, given that America's a bit far away. So geographically, and when Ukraine are doing X, Y, and Z, they're doing it because they want to get into Ukraine, into the EU, and they want to get into NATO, and this is a threat to my border, and then is also a threat to me in Moscow, because the rockets, Putin always used to talk about how quickly a rocket could get into Moscow from, say, Ukraine, from here, from there. And so that is playing on his paranoia. But it's involving all these countries around the world, and the US is really having a proxy war with Russia. I do think this is a proxy war. I would define it as a proxy war with NATO and the US against Russia. And then there's China in the background, sitting back and looking on to see who wins this. And they will get a benefit no matter who wins out of this. If Russia win, then, hey, we're friends with Russia. Yeah, we're always supporting them. If Russia lose, it's like, oh, we'll help you get back on your feet, and we'll help ourselves to some provinces and maybe some natural resources. So this is hugely, hugely important geopolitically. And for Britain, it's an opportunity for us to say, right, we can be really powerful and useful in spite of being out of Europe. So there's lots of political posturing going on from our government, whilst also it could bring us closer to Europe. Having gone out of Europe, it's an opportunity for us to work with the EU on how we can help Ukraine. So there's so many dynamics.
Mhm.
going on here that it is fascinating. I think you'll look back in history. This is huge and could be the undoing of Russia, as you know. You look back to 1991 and you look back to the breaking up of the Soviet Union, and that was a hugely important point in history. But you've had Putin ever since then, like, trying to rebuild that, and this really could be the very end of it or not. It depends how it goes.
Depends how it goes, but one lesson I always keep is that doesn't matter what, the history continues. We just can review it, make some conclusions, and take a particular decisions to affect the future the way we want it to look like. From my opinion, as a Ukrainian, I definitely want to be part of European community, which we are already, and I really hope that Ukraine will be integrated more and more. What
Uh,
I'm afraid of, and this is actually you asked in our conversation on your channel, and all the guys, I encourage you to watch our interview on Jonathan's
mm,
channel. Link will be provided down below. What I'm afraid of is for Ukraine to be this, place where the global powers clash, and which takes forever, like in Afghanistan. And this is what I'm afraid of. Yeah, I don't want my people, my country, and myself to be sandwiched in between this on this playground, which becomes the field for interest of more supreme guys out there in the world. So that's the point. Yeah, and in this case, uh, we have to push in different directions, and hopefully it will end up pretty soon. Yeah.
but there's something that's really, really important. It really annoys me about how people see this war when they look to say, "Oh, whose fault was the Ukraine war?" Right? So that they'll say, you get pro-Russian people saying it was NATO's fault. NATO were encroaching, and you get pro West saying, well, actually, it was Russia's fault because they were they invaded and etc. etc. And what annoys me is that we're forgetting the Ukrainian voice here. So we're seeing Ukraine as a tool either for NATO or for Russia. And that may be the case, right? It may be that there is an element of that. But let's not forget the voice of Ukrainians here, which is, what do you want? Okay, you want to join the EU. Then, if that's as a democratic sovereign nation, that is your entitlement, right? You can do that. You have a right to self determination. If you want to join NATO, you have a right to want that if NATO allow that. So it's really unfair to say NATO were encroaching. Yeah, there are going to be politicians who are coming to Ukraine in the 2013-14 time, and there are American politicians, of all sorts
For
of
most
persuasions.
people in Ukraine, I understand your point, and we are now speaking on the English language channel, which have a global widespread. But the public discussion which is happening in Ukraine, to most people, this is like the war for independence. Of course, people do realize that this would not be possible without the Western support, but for absolutely the majority people in Ukraine, this is the fight for independence, and this is the continuity that their grandparents were fighting for. This is how it is. Many of my friends are now serving on the front line in the east, and for them that was like the calling to continue the unfinished struggle that their grandparents were involved to.
Exactly. So it's an insult to them and what they're doing to say, "Oh, it's NATO," as if they're doing that for NATO or on behalf of NATO. These people are fighting and putting their lives on the line for the right to self-determination, for the right to independence, as you say, and for the right to live in a sovereign liberal democracy. And to determine what their future is, and if they want to be a part of X, Y, and Z, then they should have the right to at least want that and work towards having that. So I think we too easily see Ukraine as a tool for either side without recognizing Ukraine in its own right.
Mhm.
I just think that's important. It's important for
That
me
is
to say
very
it as a
pleasing to
non-Ukrainian.
hear from you. That's very
Yeah.
good to hear from you. And I think that is the good conclusion for our topic. definitely that there are interests of global superpowers are involved here. But first of all, this is the war of one group of people, of one nation, which strongly eventually speak for itself, and this voice is heard all around the world, which is the voice of
Absolutely.
Ukraine. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Jonathan. It was very interesting, insightful conversation, guys. Thanks a lot for listening, for watching to us. If you feel this is interesting, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for my channel and Jonathan's channel as well. And looking forward to see you in the upcoming videos. In the meantime, tell what's your opinion about the topic, about the Ukrainian voice, the war for independence, and the maybe like involvement of the great game. See you soon.
Thank you.